Lou, what do we do to turn this on?
It's on.
It's on?
Has you mic'd?
That's just.
I got into stamp collecting because my grandfather and father were collectors. Between them, they had one album with a few stamps in the album and 4 boxes stuffed with stamps. So they really collected, but they didn't do anything with them. And when my father died in 1940, they went into my mother's closet. She died in the 60s, and I inherited. I didn't do anything until 1980 or so. And I went through the stamps occasionally, but I found some stamps that astounded me. I found the first American stamp. They had carefully steamed it off an envelope, and it's one of those stamps that I'll show here. Stamp collecting requires a lot of research. You've seen pictures of people with a microscope or a magnifying glass looking at a stamp, and you're wondering, what are they doing? I'll try to explain what they do because it's pretty extensive. Next. First they try to grade stamps. They're graded from the best grade, extra fine mint condition with the original gum, never hinged. A hinge is what they used to do to stamps. It looked like a piece of Scotch tape, only it wasn't Scotch tape, but it was adhesive. And they'd put it on the back of the stamp and then put the other side on the envelope, so on the page of the album, so that you could lift it up and look, but it ruined the stamp because it ruined the adhesive. Never hinged, no creases or other defects, and scented with good color. Lower grades are used, but sometimes the used stamps carry more value. Lower grades, most of the time, are hinged, no gum or damaged gum, heavy cancellations, and defects with tears or creases. Next. How do they value stamps? Individuals try to value them, but it's not successful. You have to depend on the experts to do an appraisal. And the reason I say I can't really value them, because I have 2 sets of catalogs, and they, for the same stamp, sometimes they're widely divergent in value. In the 1800s, they printed a number of stamps in the thousands, and the value of stamps depends most based on how many they printed. Today, we still do it in the millions. Identifying watermarks. In the early stamps, they used to put a watermark in the paper so that they could distinguish one stamp from another. They don't do that anymore, but in the older ones, sometimes it tells you which stamp is which. Number of perforations, it varies. Perforations are what you see along the sides and the bottoms. You don't see it anymore because they all come adhesive on the back. Mint condition, type of paper, gum. Is the gum in good condition? Little changes in stamps that appear to be the same, and I've got some I'm going to show you. Misprints, some of the most valuable stamps have misprints, and many other factors. Next. This is the first United States stamp. I found it in one of the boxes. 1847. Benjamin Franklin, 5 cents. Can you imagine a 5-cent stamp back then? Not many people bought them. I can remember in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, we had 3-cent stamps.
That's right.
Benjamin Franklin. Next. George Washington was a 2nd stamp, 1847. That's 170 years old. This has been used. You can see the cancellation. It's kind of scruffy. I'll point out one of the defects along the bottom. They used to issue the stamps in sheets, and the post office would cut them out with scissors, and sometimes they weren't very careful. This came along down here, and that devalued this stamp. I always thought maybe I could snip that around, but I didn't. Can any of you guess why the father of our country was on the 2nd stamp and Benjamin Franklin was on the 1st one? Yes.
Franklin was the post office.
Pardon me?
He was the first head of the postal inspector.
First Postmaster General. So it isn't, even today it works, it isn't what you know or what experience you have, it's who you know. The first Postmaster General. Next. These are the 3 Franklin stamps. These are 1858. There are actually 4. The 4th one I don't have. This is number 2. I call that a plain vanilla stamp because it's not worth much, but there are other stamps that look just like it that are worth an awful lot. This one, Franklin number 3, there's a break in the oval down here and a break in the oval up here. That makes the difference between the 1st and 2nd one, and this one is worth way in the thousands. This one, number 3A, there's a break in the oval here, but no break anywhere up there. This one isn't worth as much. So it's very interesting. I say about the value, again, I remind you, I don't know what the real values are. I'm going to have it appraised sometime. Next. Martha Washington. And they printed the abbreviation for Kansas on all the stamps of that year because there were outlaws in the wild west of Kansas who were stealing stamps from all the post office, and they sell them in other states. So the post office brilliant idea, well, let's stamp Kansas on it. That didn't stop it. Next. Jefferson, 9-cent. This was in the late 1800s, early 1900s. Outlaws were hitting them too, so they printed Nebraska, and that didn't stop it. What did stop it was, back then, the post offices were a desk or a counter or a booth in a grocery store or a hardware store, and the guys running it didn't want to handle these because they didn't understand it, and people that are buying them said, they're canceled, I don't want to buy them. So they stopped, and the outlaws stopped. Next. This is one of my favorites.
They keep going different prices.
Pardon me?
They keep changing the price on them. And they were going down instead of going up.
This was 1934. President Roosevelt was elected president. James Foley, Postmaster General, was a New York political hack who helped Roosevelt get elected, and they named him Postmaster General. Admiral Byrd that same year put together an excursion to Antarctica, and he was going to find the South Pole. He said, I found it. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But the fact is, Foley said, I can endear myself to the president. I'll only print 80 of these. I'll set up a cancellation shop down in Antarctica. We'll cancel them on an envelope, mail them to the president, senators, cabinet members, and they'll all love me. They'll be very valuable because I only made 80. Roosevelt found out what he did, he fired him, and Roosevelt ordered that 2 million of these be printed.
I wondered how you got one of the 80.
Well, this isn't one of the 80. Next. I show this because this is the first stamp that came out as they call it a pane. It's not a full page. Contained 5 stamps, 5 different people, 5 different scenes. And it was supposedly the surrender at Yorktown, not in 1976, but in 1783. And the 76 was the 200th anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. The only trouble is John Trumbull was the artist, and he painted Washington on a steed. Very nice painting. The only trouble is Washington wasn't there. And then it was General Burgoyne who took the surrender, and this sort of stamp on a pane brought in a lot of money to the post office, so they've done that ever since. Next. We talked about Jefferson, Franklin, Martha Washington. Now we got Bugs Bunny. Bugs was in 1997. These are 2 different sheets. This sheet is worth, I'm not going to say how much, but it's a very valuable sheet. This one is worth about 100. I'm going to have these over here for those of you who want to see if you can figure the difference after this is over. The fact is, they only printed about 100,000 of this one, of that one, the one that's worth much money. Next. Here's a misprint. The legs and the arms and the legs were supposed to be blue. The post office uses different printing houses to print stamps. One of the printing houses, when they put a stamp through something like this, first they do the black color, then they do the brown, then the red, with different passes over the rollers. And this place messed up, and many of these went into circulation before they stopped it, and now these are they're valuable. This is the 1976 Olympics. Next. This is the first time they came out with 4 stamps in a row. They were either in a strip or a roll or a sheet or a booklet. But it's the first time they had 4 completely different subjects in a row on a stamp. The post office continues to do this today because they get a lot of money, collectors buy them. Next. One of my favorites. You know the Connecticut license plates say Constitution State? It isn't. New Hampshire is. Because in 1787, Constitution was drafted and it required that nine of the colonies ratify the Constitution. On 1987, in June, Connecticut ratified it. They were the 8th state. New Hampshire ratified it the next month. They were the 9th state. So they are the ones that put the Constitution into effect, that created the United States. They had the old man of the mountain. And it says up here that he weathered the storms. He was resolute. He was strong. Any of you know what happened?
He got a quarter first.
He disintegrated shortly after the stamps came out. What do you think happened to the value of the stamps?
Probably lost it.
They went up,
Really?
way up. Interesting. Next. This is the first airmail. The reason I show it is 1918. So here we are 101 years later, and I'll bet there aren't many people know the first airmail stamp was 1918. This is a Jenny plane that was used in First World War. 6 cents would get you to any of the 13 colonies and other states on this side of the Mississippi River in 3 to 5 days. Pretty advanced. Next. This is the 24 cent. 10 years later, 24 cents would get you to California in 7 to 10 days compared to a month by the overland. This stamp became one of the most valuable stamps ever because one of the printing houses, when they made the second and third pass with colors, they put the plane on upside down. And one of these upside down stamps went for over $1 million at auction. There weren't many of them that went into circulation. Next. Now this is German. I'm going to point out, this is hyperinflation. After the First World War, the Allies imposed reparations on Germany that were onerous. It amounted to 25% of their gross national product every year. If we were paying 25% today, it would amount to several $1 trillion going out of the country. So inflation set in because businesses were closing, people couldn't buy things, there weren't goods available. Here's a 1 mark stamp. 300, 500, 1,000, 4,000, 500,000, 1 million, 20 million, 200 million, 500 million. What do you think happened? The economy was in ruins, people couldn't buy things, they were out of no work. Hitler was in jail in 1923, and he wrote his manifesto, Mein Kampf, in jail. He followed it. He was made chancellor in the early 30s. His party was elected to a majority of the Congress, the Reichstag, in 1928. So that brought this guy to power. Next. As a result of the inflation, this was a 1 billion, 100,000 milliarden, they called it, banknote. And down here, I'll read this because you probably can't see it. The hyperinflation that followed the First World War saw many notes like this would hardly buy a book of matches. At the peak of inflation, notes were being issued in 100 billion marks. Workers were paid several times a day and given time off to buy essentials before it became worthless. No wonder Hitler got in. Next. So anyhow, stamp collecting is a wonderful hobby. It's fun, it's educational. We tell a lot of different stories about people. and it increases awareness about different and interesting subjects. Next. I have the two versions of Bugs Bunny over there, if any of you want to look at them and see if you can figure out what the difference is, because it's subtle. We know that even a single line or a single change can make the difference between something that's ordinary and something valuable. There's only one difference between those two Bug Bunny. See if you can see. Thanks for listening. Want any questions?
If the first stamp came out in 1847, how was the mail paid for prior to 1847?
It wasn't. People would hire people to deliver something. If they knew someone was going to another city, they'd give them mail, but there was no formal thing.
Popularity these days of collecting stamps, because it's not something that my kids ever really got into. I mean, I did it as a kid. I still have them all, and they really don't have any interest. Is it something that's actually sort of making its way down the generations, or is it a dying art?
No, it's not. There's very active stamp clubs around.
Really?
Very active, and with some younger members. There's a Boston Stamp Club, the Waltham Stamp Club that I belong to.
Is that the one that's over at Regis?
Pardon me?
Regis College? Is that where that
That's the
one
one at the Cardinal Spellman Museum. It's a stamp museum at Regis.
Yeah, I've been in there once. I was just curious because I don't hear anybody talking about them anymore.
Well, we have 340 million people in the country, and there's about 40 million collectors.
Really? Wow. Okay.
They keep the post office going.
At one time, Ed, they used to issue stamps from different post offices. First, they used to call them first day issues.
Yeah, first day issues.
And I remember he's
I have some of
mailing
those first day.
an envelope to the post office ahead of time, and they would put the stamp on the envelope and cancel it and then send it back to me.
That's exactly that one that I showed of the old man on the mountain.
Yeah.
That was a first day card.
Okay.
They have first day covers, and the post office will do it.
Are they still collecting those? Or, I don't,
Yeah, they're still doing
okay.
it, and they make money there too. Yes.
What about postcards? The postcards plain postcards that have the stamp on them. Do you collect those as well?
There's still some in print, but not much. They stopped for a while when they got up to about 20 cents, 25 cents. But I understand they're starting to print them again. Instead of teasing it, I'll tell you all. That 10th stamp that's up where Bugs Bunny is, on one of them it's perforated, and on the other it's not perforated. They found they made a mistake on the one that's not perforated, and they stopped it at 100,000, but some of them got into circulation. And with that, I was fortunate to get one of them. I traded stamps for it.
Thank you,
You're
Ed.
right. Absolutely right.
At this point, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn. So moved. Second? Sure. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much for coming.
All right.
Well, please get rid of my balcony.
I will. He called her at 7, quarter past 7. She's usually up at 5:05.